From God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, June 5th, 2020. And boy, do we have a program packed with information today. We've actually taken a lot of the smaller stories out and moved them to next week so that we can get right into the meat of the program today. We're going to begin with iniquity shall abound. Then we're going to move right into the 60s repeating itself, talking about the stories that we have been waiting for and talking about for years that were going to surface before the return of Jesus Christ. And we're going to carry that theme right into the Nuggets portion of the program of history repeating itself. And we're actually going to bring in some DVD information from a series that we talked about 4 years ago that told us what we would be in today. So now, before I begin the program, I know you may not be able to see all this right now, but I'm going to bring up in a program today that you can see this. And the reason I'm bringing this to you today is this brochure tells you about almost 60 hours of DVD information that talks about the times and the conditions that we live in today. Every one of those DVDs are available to you right now online. And you can go right to the main page, look for the Prophecy series. It is a Bible study series. I'll talk a lot more about that as we go through. But the reason I'm telling you that now is because much of the information I'm using today is referring to the information that is available to you to go back to research to do Bible study with. All right, normally what we would do right here, we would stop our program, we would go into the covering the COVID deaths in our weekly update to keep you updated on where everything is. But we're going to skip that today. We're going to get back into that next week because it's amazing that all around the country and all the talk about having to be shut down and keep businesses out and you can't go to church, all of a sudden now it doesn't seem to be very important with the riots and everything going on. And almost nobody's talking about all the people who are out there who are next to one another and the thousands of people across the country worrying about COVID. It is absolutely amazing. So we'll come back to that next week because we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. So let's get right into iniquity shall abound. God tells us at the end time that iniquity, which is another word for, believe it or not, lawlessness, shall abound. And that's what we're looking at around our nation. So now, let's take a look at something. This is really, really amazing. Does it feel like as soon as one problem gets over with, there's another problem here and then another problem? This is an article from the New York Times author, Michelle Goldberg, and she says this. Noted that 2020 started off like 1974, an impeachment crisis, just like in 1974. Right here on this set in our sermon, we began in January talking about 2020, the decade of change. And boy, is it changing. Now, she goes on to say this. Quickly, it became a 1918 pandemic, turned into a 1929 economic collapse, a crash, and is now a 1968 massive urban unrest. We could add 1992 and the images of Los Angeles burning after 4 police officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King. And she could go on and on and on. And she would be absolutely right. It seems like there just seems to be one wave after another of problem upon problem upon problem. And we're not even talking about what's going on around the world. Now China's getting its feathers all upset that everybody's talking to them, blaming them for the coronavirus, which they are. And now they're talking about threatening to stop buying from the U.S. the products that they have agreed to in the deal they made with the president. So now even the farmers who have been under siege from the last couple of years of weather conditions and then not buying from China because of the tariffs that's been put on. Now they're talking about not buying because we don't like the way you're talking to us. And so that's just the beginning. So there's problems going on around the world. The Bible talks about that, and we talk about it. Again, let me refer to this in this series. And if you haven't watched this series, it's online. Go to the website. You can see it. It's called Roaring Seas. The interesting thing of what God has done for us as a church over the last 7 years, He has given us the insight to prepare sermon series of conditions in the times we live in today, comparing them to the times of the past, to tell us about where we're going to go to in the future, because God has told us He's not going to do anything till He tells us in advance. In these series, and if you try to do it all at one time, it's just going to overwhelm you. So I'm asking everybody to go to that and use it as a Bible study. God says we're supposed to study the Bible every single day. Simply take one sermon message, use it as a Bible study 1 week at a time. And you'll go through the whole thing in just a little bit over a year. And what it will do is, believe it or not, if you can grasp the information that we put together in these DVD Bible studies, after decades and decades of being in the church and putting these pieces of this puzzle together, it will help you in the future so that when you see events happen that take place, like we're talking about today in America, you will be ready for it because God has already showed you they're going to happen. And you will be ready and you will be prepared when it takes place. This series, Roaring Seas, focuses on, believe it or not, one verse, Luke 21:25, talking about where we would be today in the conditions that would be like one wave of problems after another. And that is what I just read to you from that New York Times piece that was in there. So now, what we need to understand about the events that are taking place is found Hosea 4, verse 6. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. It says, because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you, that you shall be no priest to me. It means that we're not going to have the leadership that usually guided and founded and just cemented a nation with their feet to God's holy word. He said, because you've rejected the knowledge, God says, you're not going to have that guidance anymore. So when we listen to the leadership today and many of the religious leaders of today, it makes absolutely no sense what they're trying to tell the people. 2 Timothy 3 says this, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. Now this is an NIV version, so it's slightly different than I normally use with King James. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving. Doesn't that sound like the information that we're looking at when you turn on your TV and the news coming through today? Slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous. What a list of an indictment against the people that looks like America today. Rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Well, that's where we are today. So this iniquity that we're talking about, God mentions that, and this is where it comes from in Matthew 24, verse 12. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Now, you need to remember something else here. This is not only in general of the world at large, but it's also that He's talking to His disciples. We're talking about now that this specific information was given to His called out ones. So you and I need to take that as a warning to make sure that we're focused on God so that we don't lose that love, because it all goes on to say, and brother's going to turn against brother. And that's what we see in the news trying to tell us today. If you see somebody in your neighborhood or your neighbor's doing something, call them in and report them. So you see all of these things now coming to pass of what God says we need to be warned about. Descending into chaos. Look at the stuff that's going on today. Over 25 states with protests and riots. Over 40 cities now having curfews. And as of last night, I think it went to over 50 cities with curfews. 6,700 National Guardsmen called out in 15 states. All of this is changing. I put this together yesterday afternoon, and as of last night, the president came on and he says he is going to hold back no support, so whatever is needed. So as I watched the news this morning, one of the things they were doing right now, we were listening to a military helicopter surveying Washington, D.C. to watch where people were going to see about protecting the nation. Isn't it amazing that we've had to possibly use military now, beyond just National Guard, to protect our nation from within? This is what Abraham Lincoln said, that at the time would come that we would not have to be worried about being destroyed from without, but from within. And that's what's going on exactly right now. Then we have this, thousands, now it could be maybe even tens of thousands now, of businesses have been burnt or destroyed. Innocent people who have nothing to do with any of this violence, or any of the atrocity of that poor man being killed by that police officer through its police brutality, just destroyed their lives right now. And in these neighborhoods where this takes place, it has been proven that it takes decades to recover, if it ever recovers. Now, burning down of America. This is where we are today, the riots that are taking place in America. And how far will we go to destroy the fabric of our society as a nation? It's really interesting when you think about this. Now, I've got 2 videos here. I'm actually going to play a third video. So one of these is with Tucker Carlson. I'm going to have a later one with Tucker Carlson. And the reason I'm using him right now, because he has in his monologues a very succinct way of putting things together. Now, I also want to mention, I don't agree with everything he's saying, but for many of the things that he does say, and what I'm going to be using in these clips today, he's right on target for where he's at. So the first one I'm going to show you, this was taken last week at the beginning of all this, and show you the looting, how it was kind of calm, but people like they're out shopping, like it was no big deal. Let's play the first one on looting, and I'll be right back.
Let me know. You have to go do it.
My Somalian brother!
Move, bitch!
She's stabbing people!
Hey!
She got a knife!
She got a knife! Get out of here! Hey, leave her alone! She got a knife!
She's stabbing people!
How far will we go as a society to tear down the fabric that holds us together? That was just the beginning. Since that time, they had looting taking place all around the country. They got very sophisticated. In California, they send people out on bicycles, and they began to break windows to see if police come, and then they send in cars with their license plates covered, and then they send teams of people in, literally teams of people in, with the trunks open or the back of their cars open, running in, just throwing in arms full of materials and clothes and things, and then they pull off and pull the next car in till they have wiped out entire blocks of businesses. Absolutely amazing when you see the fabric of our society is absolutely being destroyed. Now we got more. Now this next, oops, let me back up here now before I move. This next one might want to trouble you. And I'm going to warn everybody, there's a little bit of violence on this one. And this is the one from Tucker Carlson to begin with. And he's talking about how they're going to come with threats to destroy people. And as you've seen they did with that woman in that wheelchair, supposedly she's holding a knife. But you see, it doesn't matter. I mean, what's she going to get out of this chair and go chase people with this thing? Absolutely unbelievable. But look at the violence. Now, let's play the second video.
So underneath all of this, the most ominous part perhaps, is the potential threat to our justice system in the United States, which, by the way, is the best thing about this country. In practice, that system is often very flawed, like everything that humans control. We've told you a lot about that on this show. But in its ideals, in what it tries to do and often succeeds in doing, there is no better or fairer system in the world. You may dismiss that out of hand, but ask yourself, where would you rather go on trial, especially if you're innocent? Nowhere. The United States. The worst moments in American history are those in which violent mobs have nullified our justice system and the protections it guarantees and murdered the accused without trial. That is called lynching. Every American is ashamed that happened here and should be. And yet, and this should bother you more than probably anything else you've heard today, some in positions of influence are calling for it again now. 3 weeks ago, a day after video emerged of Ahmaud Arbery, the shooting in Georgia, Bernie Sanders surrogate Shaun King posted the following message on Facebook. It was aimed at the two men later charged with murdering Arbery. Quote, to Gregory and Travis McMichael, I need you to know that I know where you live and where you are hiding. Right now, I'm the only thing keeping about 150 different people from killing you. To the state of Georgia, hold these men accountable. I assure you, it's in your best interest, end quote. Now, Shaun King describes himself as a civil rights activist, but what he's suggesting here is not civil rights, it's the end of it. It's lynching. That's what King is threatening. No one seemed to care, though. Famous people in Los Angeles still love Shaun King. Then came Minneapolis. The news media have worked hard to hide what the rioters are actually saying or what their intent is, but pieces of video have leaked out anyway, and here's some of it.
We could have more fires. We have plenty of structures that need burning. We asked our city officials plenty of times to take down these structures. They haven't, so we're going to do it ourselves. It's easy work. It ain't nothing to us. We built this country and we will burn it down.
Ain't nothing left here, so when we start coming to the suburbs, when we come to the government center, then what y'all gonna do? You see what I'm saying? So, hey, that's just what's gonna happen. One of ours, two of yours, and this is dying. This is only the beginning.
Over the last several days, demonstrators have surrounded the home of Derek Chauvin. He's the officer who's now charged in the murder of George Floyd. One person bragged on Facebook that a mob had blocked 3 straight food deliveries to his home. Quote, he's in there hungry, let's hope he's effing scared. Now, you may think he deserves to be convicted of murder, and it's entirely possible he does. But the system is playing out. The people you're watching on the screen don't believe that because they don't believe in the system. And that's why thugs also came to the home of Hennepin County District Attorney Mike Freeman.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want? Now! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Look how many are defending this killer's house. Look how many are defending this killer's house.
So, to be clear, we support the right of assembly, of speech, of political protest. We defend it relentlessly on the show. Very few others do. A crowd marching outside City Hall is a call for justice, and we support it even if we disagree with their positions. But a mob surrounding the home of a district attorney is not a political protest. It's a threat designed to subvert our justice system. Mike Freeman's job is to weigh the evidence in a criminal case. The opinions of CNN anchors are not relevant. He considers the actual evidence. That's our system. But he can't do that. No one can if he fears he or his family will be hurt. The mob is perfectly aware of that, and that's why they came to his house.
And that's where it began. And it got worse and worse and worse. As of this weekend, people now are taking entire pallets of bricks, buying them and shipping them into major cities and telling people and the young people where they can find these bricks to go throw through the windows to continue the anarchy that continues to arise. They're also finding Molotov cocktails in cars that are stationed at certain particular points filled with gasoline waiting to set fire. And as of last night, maybe you can find, I'm going to ask my brother, maybe you can find a picture of this. They actually found a van that's supposed to be a first aid rescue van for the protest rioters who are actually out on the streets to give them first aid. And in that van, they found a bat. And that bat was wrapped with barbed wire. It was one of the most ominous, chilling things I've seen on the news. That someone would be willing to take a bat and not only beat a person with a bat, but they have it wrapped with barbed wire to just fillet and just rip and tear apart and shred human flesh. Now that mindset is unbelievable and it's unbridled. And we read that in Timothy, and God says it's going to come. That's the beginning of where all this started, and you saw in those two videos. And it got worse from there. Isaiah 1, verses 4 through 7 says, a sinful nation laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel to anger. They are gone away backward, God says. He says, why will you be stricken any more, and will you revolt more and more? God said, the whole head is sick, and the heart is faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises, putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with anointment. So God talks about the condition of our nation before the return of Jesus Christ is going to be in that state. And you're beginning to see that taking place right now. God goes on to say, your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Now, does that look reminiscent of the news we're looking at today? Our cities are burned with fire. Not only that, we see our cities and our nation being burned with the dryness of the drought in the West, and how just almost states absorbed by fire that's going on. He says, your land, the strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate, as overthrown by strangers. Now, when I read that again for the first time, it really struck me here as I was reading this, as overthrown by strangers. Because your cities are burned with fire as by strangers. In other words, it's not the strangers that's doing it. It's your own people who's destroying their own nation, is what God's trying to tell us here. So we're looking at all of that right now. Look at the fires that are taking place. Now take a look at this picture. Does that picture, the bottom left picture that you got up on your screen right now, does that look familiar? Well, that picture is actually from Detroit, 1967. Part of our story today that we're talking about is the 60s repeating itself. God says not only is there a former and there's a latter, there's a physical and there's a spiritual. So what we're looking at today is that all of this is taking place. There's an evil spirit that's rising in this nation. We have given way to it. In fact, one of the stories we took out was in the state of either Washington or Oregon. They actually had this Satan group going up on the state capitol and doing their rituals. And so there just wasn't enough time to bring it in today, but we're going to bring that story to you next week. So here we have Detroit, the 60s repeating itself. Doesn't that look familiar? You could take those same pictures and colorize them and say that was today. Unbelievable what's taking place, what we're looking at. This is what I was referring to right here. Our Prophecy Timeline series. This is a 4-page brochure, and it's got pictures of each one of our series. It also gives you a timeline of when they were all given. So that I'm asking you to do this. You can write in for it. We'll send you one of these absolutely free of charge. Or even better, just go online. Go find on the main page of the website, and on the bottom of the page, there's a picture that says Prophecy Timeline. Click on that. It'll take you to where these DVDs are. And you can also get that brochure and have it printed out and have it at your fingertips. Start your 3-ring binder and go through and make the notes. Use this time while we have to be prepared for what's coming so that you're not caught unawares. God says many will be at the end time. This is the inside, the series of sermons focusing on the conditions in America and what to expect. When we get into our Nuggets portion of the program today, that's what we're going to be talking about, is the conditions in America that we talked about 4 years ago was coming, and they are here today. So as you can see in that little brochure, each one of those series is packed with lots and lots of information. Here, this one is the America in Decline and the Fall of a Nation. And that's part of what I'm using today in our Nuggets portion is this piece right here. Just one of the series. There's 3 sermons in that, or 4 sermons in this one, I believe it is. And we'll be talking about just a piece of that. Every one of these things is filled with powerful information that's going to help you. Before we did that series, we brought this series out, America Sold Out. And if you haven't seen it, this is where we began putting all our series together back in 2013 and moved them into 2014. The America Sold Out is talking about how our nation has sold us out. And in that series, we covered the debt, the financial cliff that we went through. We covered in the second one, the embarkation of America, how we as a nation have left God, just like the Pilgrims did, leaving to find God when they came to America, and talking about at that same time, because we have lost our way from God, we have allowed a foreign God, a foreign religion to be able to come in. And you notice there's nothing being said about Muslims today. They don't have a problem with COVID. Nobody talks about them. They don't have to worry about if they can go to their mosque or not, because everybody's scared to death to talk about this pagan god that the Muslims have, Muhammad, in Islam. Unbelievable, a Christian nation of where we are today. America in Decline series was 3 years later that we talked about conspirators of a fallen nation. God talked about breaking the pride of our power, and we certainly have. We look around the nation today, they're just laughing at us. Then there was one of the series was called The Lovers of Self. And then part of what we're using today, where God talked about, speak to us, smooth things. In 2016, we have in that series all of these. And today I'm going to use just a piece, just a few slides out of that when we get into the Nuggets portion. This is part of that series. The changes in America from the 60s. Is history repeating itself? The 60s is the generation of the beginning of the removal of God, the protest of the free love, and abortion. That generation is now the people who are teaching this generation and running our nation. A new generation is rising up with the 60s same spirit. That spirit is evil. That is the spirit that began the movement of God out of our nation, out of our schools, away from our children, out of the prayers in our classes with our youth. From the very beginning. No longer can our children pray in school. That generation that allowed that to take place is now the ones who are running this nation. And you see it in whether you want to admit it or not, you know it's there and you know it takes place. So now we're going to talk about that when we come back. So now let's take a break. Let's take a look at this little video here. And believe it or not, God does love you. And we'll talk about that when we come back, the 60s. So take a moment. Catch your breath, and we'll be right back.
We are often told, God loves you. But what does that really mean? That some impersonal force, galaxies away, may consider you from time to time? Or that you are a single drop in a vast ocean of humanity, and God cares for all of it? There are billions of lives, billions of stories. Can we really believe He has great destinies planned for all of them? Surely the ruler of the universe has more important affairs than to notice the needs of one singular individual. But hear this, nothing could be further from the truth. When God says, I love you, it means that He crafted every detail of your being. Your every feature is His perfect design. His mind perceives your worries and your thoughts. His heart is broken by your pain. You are His child, created in His image. Your value exceeds all the riches of earth. Your worth extends beyond the stars. And though you may be unaware, He's carefully constructing the events of your life to build His kingdom. If you are willing, He can and will achieve wonders through your hands. It is the deepest passion, the most meaningful promise. It is your security, your hope, and your future. It is the truth beyond doubt. God loves you.
Welcome back. All right, let's get into our Nuggets portion of the program today. Is history repeating itself? Talking about the 60s. All right, so now let's get right into our program. The changes in America from the 60s should be obvious to everyone. Talking about history repeating itself. This is a quote from Edmund Burke. He's a historian and he's a government official from back into the 1700s. He's quoted quite often. He said, "All that is necessary for triumph of evil, for the triumph of evil, is that good men do nothing." And that's what we're looking at today. Quite amazing that when you began to look at the beginning of this, when the rioting began to break out, that the government and all the police and even the National Guard, they seemed to just disappeared. And to just turn that city loose to the rioting and the protest, which sparked the protest around the rest of the country. That if they can get away with it, so can everyone else. Here's another quote. He says, "Whenever a separation is made between liberty and justice, neither, in my opinion, is safe." So if there is no justice for all, then there is no liberty for all. And this nation has to have equality in its justice and in its liberty. And God tells us at the end time, he says, justice is going to cry out in the streets and it's not going to be found. Why? Because the people have lost track of what is right and what is wrong. And everyone is looking out for themselves. So those who really need to be fought for, to be cared for, they're abandoned on the street and having to defend themselves. We have gone from freedom to bondage. Edmund Burke on the leadership, he said, "Men are qualified for civil liberty in the exact proportion to their disposition to moral change upon their own appetites." We see that. And then what he's trying to say there, if people cannot control themselves with their own moralities of what's right and wrong, then a nation has no hope. You are seeing that has been building for decades now. He said that is in proportion as their love to justice is above their rapacity. In proportion as their soundness and sobriety of understanding is above their vanity and presumption. In proportion as they are more disposed to listen to the counsel of the wise and good in preference to the flattery of the knaves, which means the dishonest or unscrupulous men. Unfortunately, many in our society, in its leadership today, and in our government, are listening to those who flatter them rather than listening to wise counsel and good judgment. God's response, look what he says, "They're wise men because they have abandoned God." He said he was going to do a marvelous work, and what would happen is their wise men would perish. And in our nation today, when you begin to look at the decisions being made, you have to wonder, say, what in the world are they thinking? But that's where we are today, and God said it was going to be that. We also have a time where we don't understand the discerning of the spirits, what is right and what is wrong. We reach the point where people cannot discern between right and wrong and good and evil. As we heard, as many people said today, believe it or not, they're justifying all this looting and the burning because America did that with the Boston Tea Party. So if we're going to make any changes, it has to be done through rioting and looting and burning, just like America was founded, which is absolutely a bald-faced lie from what they're talking about, what's going on today, calling wrong right and right wrong. Malachi 3 says, "For those who feared the Lord spoke often one to another." By the way, let me just stop for just a second when I read that. Isn't this amazing that when COVID came, you know what it did? It brought in all the spirits that are anti-God. Those who feared the Lord spoke often one to another. And what did this do? It took our leadership and all their wisdom to separate everybody. And the anger came when the churches wanted to get together. It brought about a rapacity of anger in their nation. Absolutely reverse of everything of God's will. It says, "And the Lord listened and heard them, and the book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear the Lord and meditate on his name. And in that day," God says, "I will make my jewels, and I will spare them, as a man spares his own son who serves him. And then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between he who serves God and one who serves him not." Now, by the way, let me remind you now, is in this series, what you're looking at now in these slides, I have not changed a single thing. We did this 4 years ago in 2016 and said that this was coming. And I simply took yesterday and I went into those notes, pulled out some of the slides, and I'm giving them to you today, and they're more pertinent today than they were 4 years ago. And they will be more pertinent 4 years from now before Jesus returns. Let's go on. Changes in America from the 60s. History repeating itself. We have come 180 degrees from a nation of godliness where morals were respected and admired to a nation where those same values and morals are now considered as bigotry, racist, and judgmental. It says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Iniquity or a lawlessness shall abound, which is what we began this program with today, iniquity in America. History repeating itself. This is what we read just a little bit ago. 60s is the generation of the beginning of the removal of God. Protest of free love and abortion. That generation are now the people who are teaching the generation for today and running this nation. The new generation is rising up with the same spirit of the 60s, but only more angry. So now let's ask a question. God tells us before Jesus Christ returns, he says that Satan knows he has but a short time. If God begins to move his protection off this nation, just like he did with Job, and God shows us with Job, that when he says, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan says, well, I can't do anything. You got him protected. He's covered. He's got a hedge on all sides. I can't do anything. So God says, okay, I'm going to remove some of that protection, and you're going to be able to do certain things to him. So now, when you look at this same spirit, if God now, who protected this nation, begins to remove his spirit and watch to begin the anger of Satan and his demons, because if Satan knows he has a short time, so do his demons. Imagine the anger that's inside of them that goes into the people to bring about this revolt of anger on the nation, and how it begins to just blow up like a bomb and fire that you're watching and witnessing today begin to take place. And it will get more and more as we move on. What is that spirit? All right, what is that spirit? That spirit is an anti-spirit. Anti what? All right, anti what? The spirit that removes freedom. God says, you know, the truth shall make you free. So it's removing the truth of God. John 8, verse 32. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So how does that take place, by the way? Silencing through intimidation and violence. And today, we are locked up. The people who are trying to protect themselves, they have to go in at night, especially in these cities, for fear of something beginning to happen to them through intimidation. You know, people in schools, people who believe in the conservative Christian movement, the young people, they're not allowed to have a voice in school. They become the object of intimidation within their own classes, creating the state of fear that controls the people. That's what you're witnessing going on around the country. One control is political correctness. And if the people in the leadership of our nation who govern and guide this nation will not speak the truth and would rather be politically correct, they have given into the intimidation that drives the fear that controls the people's hearts and their minds. The 60s repeating itself. I got one more video now. This is about 5 minutes long. It's longer than I really wanted, but I cut down a monologue. This was from last night, about 5 minutes long. The monologue was probably 12, 15 minutes. But I wanted to bring out a certain piece because it ends with a poor woman pouring her heart out now who can't go anywhere because of the fear of what's taking place and the burning down of everything around her. And watch what's going on here. Let's play this video, and I'll be back in just a few minutes.
In Columbia, South Carolina, a man called the police when things began to fall apart. Rioters saw him call. They surrounded that man and they beat him. Onlookers laughed as he was pummeled.
Oh, hell no. They about to get on his oh, Lord! Oh, no! What? Damn!
In Rochester, New York, a group of 8 men smashed the windows of a jewelry store. A couple who lived above the shop emerged to confront them. Both of them were viciously beaten with a ladder and a 2x4. In Dallas, a man armed with what appeared to be a sword did his best to defend a business from looters. The mob bashed him in the head with a rock and a skateboard.
What they doing?
it's hard to watch. In San Jose, rioters with crowbars stormed the highway and attacked vehicles trying to pull drivers from their cars. In Birmingham, Alabama, a local reporter called Stephen Quinn was beaten and then he was robbed on live television as he tried to cover the looting.
That is the horrible scene that you see right there as they are. We're wanting to make sure that Stephen is all right.
In Portland, Oregon, a man was beaten apparently for daring to carry an American flag in public. He never released the flag, by the way.
Done with people like you. I have an opinion.
How many of these people died? How many were murdered by the rioters? We don't know yet. At the least, some were likely disabled for life. They were beaten that badly. And then there was the mass stealing. It seemed to be everywhere over the weekend. In Buckhead, an upscale part of Atlanta, rioters stole a Tesla from a dealership and drove it through an indoor mall, just to underscore how completely out of control things were. In Portland, Oregon, mobs looted Louis Vuitton, Apple, and Chase Bank, among many others. They often set fires as they left. In Chicago, protesters fought systemic racism by running through a Nike store stealing shoes. And in Washington, D.C., a federal city surrounded by military bases and protected at all times by the single highest concentration of law enforcement in the world, criminals operated with apparent impunity in the streets. They looted Georgetown last night. They smashed the windows in federal buildings. They desecrated virtually every war memorial in the city a week after Memorial Day. And then, as you likely know, last night they set fire to St. John's Episcopal Church, a 200-year-old building that has welcomed every American president since James Madison. It's right across the street from the White House. For people stuck inside anywhere during this insanity, the sick, the elderly, the powerless, the experience was terrifying. Listen to this woman from Minneapolis.
How was last night?
Scary. They went straight to Office Max, the dollar store, and every store over here that I go to. I have nowhere to go now. I have no way to get there because the buses aren't running.
She's just one. Tens of thousands of Americans across our nation. Absolutely horrendous what's going on. There were a whole lot more to talk about that I could have brought in, but that I just wanted to bring in just a little bit to be so gory because there's a lot more violence that's out there. Let me ask you something. Does it sound like, if you were like that poor lady and many of the others that they've interviewed across the nation, that you're under siege? That's another series that we began. That was one of the most recent of our series, showing how America now is that evil spirit is surrounding this nation, and like we are now under siege. And because of that, it is almost now as if they have broken through the wall now and are beginning to tear apart the nation from within. We have come full circle. We have come from a nation of laws under God with godly values, a nation fundamentally changed with substituting of man's laws. But today, that we fear today is the rising up of people who have seen the demise of the nation, that are now raising their voices again to replace the values that were once removed. These are biblical parallel events to the time that we live in today in America. It's parallel of the events of the church. The WCG, which is the Worldwide Church of God, was established during the rise of the upheavals in 1930s and the 1940s. It is the greatest time of growth for our church that came during the upheavals in America in the 1960s and the 1970s. I want you to remember something here, because this is not a program of that there is no hope. There is a reason for all of this, and there's a reason that we've seen all of this back in the 60s. Back then, the church began with the scattering and went silent following the 60s and the 70s, similar to the time that was when Christ, when he went into the wilderness territories, until it was time. We have said in this program now for many years that the time would come that we would see the 60s rise again. And when that time began to surface, we would begin to see some of the greatest growth in the church at the end time in modern days that we have ever seen. I believe we are there today. In this slide, I've just put up 3 numbers, 1, 2, and 3. I brought out 3 specific points from this one specific slide. So what I want you to do today is when you finish this program, come back to it, take a look at this one slide, and then what I would like you to do for next week, I'm giving you some homework, you might say, is what are the duality of the events that you're looking at from our time from these 3 points? Every single one has a spiritual value, has a spiritual prophecy, and spiritual insight. But I want you to go find it. We'll talk about that next week. All right, that's it for our program today. Let's begin to wrap up from the home office. In the mail this week, Being Called by God from Bobby Weber, which is one of our ministers right here at the home office, and the sermon that we offered in the card this last month was Can God Call Good What He Has Declared Evil? Powerful sermon. So in the mail last week, it was a sermon that a sermon offering is the coming age of conspiracies and false prophecies. And by the way, God willing, I'll get that sermon put together for this week. As you can see, we've been a little distracted with all the information going on. But if you don't have anywhere to go tomorrow, God willing, we got our internet fixed, or will be fixed by that time. We've been having trouble in the last couple of weeks from Cox Cable in a box that they had, and they keep saying there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't go out right. They're due here actually to fix it this week. So this coming week, hopefully we can live stream without any problems. And I plan to do that sermon, The Coming Age of Conspiracies and False Prophecies, dealing with the warnings that God tells us to give us hope for the end time. That's this coming Saturday. So if you don't have anywhere to go, if you have services and your church is meeting, by all means meet with them, and you can always get this sermon later. But if you don't have anywhere to go, tune in with us. We'd love to have you for this sermon. All right, that's it for our program today. And as always, we'd like to close this News Nuggets and Insights with a little upbeat video. This one's called A New Thing. Take a look. We'll be right back to close our program. What a great little video. Well, we appreciate you staying with us today. A lot of information. This is a very important program. And we're asking your help. We need your support to share this information with everybody. If you find it has value and you know that it's important, you're concerned about our nation, not only pray for our nation, but do something about it. Take this video and just forward it to everybody. Send everybody, let them know what's going on. There's going to come an innumerable multitude of people who that God is going to call out of this wicked world. And when you hope, that'll be your families, those who are not in the church yet, your mothers, your dads, your sisters, brothers. And we're getting information from people calling in that there are people in their families that are finally listening. So don't give up. You know, God, you never know what God's going to do by opening up their minds and their hearts. So take this week, make it incumbent upon yourself to share this information with everybody that you know. And they're going to love you for it, or not. But next week, stay in prayer, stay close to God, and God be with you.